Hello, you. It's me. Today we're going to talk about Parallel Hells by Leon Craig, which is a collection of 13 short stories, horror stories that feel very personal, very intimate. Reviewing short story collections, I think, is very tricky. So I guess I'll talk about the overall vibe of the book, some themes I felt ran through it, some stories that I particularly liked. There won't be a huge amount on the time bar though, it'll just be one lump. So here we go. I'll start by saying everything in this book was gorgeous. Honestly, this was so beautiful, and I don't think there was a single story in here that didn't wow me. The way this was written was somehow very poetic without feeling overly flowery and descriptive. It really evoked feelings, imagery wise, of Angela Carter's writing style. There were a lot of turns of phrase that I found myself lingering on because they were just particularly lovely to read or quite romantic sounding. The stories are, in a very short space of time, able to give you this intense burst of emotional connection to characters that are either very human or very intentionally not human, but allows you to empathize with them all the same. Whenever I read short story collections and I see themes recurring through the collection, I always wonder whether that is something deliberately done by the author to tie them all together in a collection, or whether that is maybe indicative of the life experiences of the author, and that's why the theme crops up again and again in their stories. Let me know what you think in the comments. There were a couple that kept jumping out at me as overarching themes. The first was that a lot of stories in here are explorations of identity, especially maybe queer identity, queer horror being a whole vibe, told about people discovering things about themselves that they might not necessarily like, ways in which they don't conform to molds that they think they should conform to. A lot of stories in here, outside of being surreal fantasy horror, involve this kind of resolution of inner conflict by the protagonist of the story. Or maybe not always resolution, but exploration of. The second was control. In some way, in a lot of these stories, there is an element of a character thinking they are in control of a situation when they are absolutely not. And they're totally in denial, and there is this unwillingness to accept powerlessness and lack of authority. Also, this story collection makes you ask really interesting questions. One of my favorites was called Hags, about a demon that, after hundreds of years of being alive, has refined their diet down to one thing: they feed on shame. You have this story telling you about the demon's past, their relationship with their friends, their guilt maybe at not revealing what they are to people that they do genuinely love. It talks about shame as a negative emotion. If it's removed, isn't that always a good thing? Is it ever right to decide to remove something from somebody else's life that you deem negative without their consent? Is this a story in part about acting in other people's best interests as you see them and then making the decision not to do that? These stories, I think, are really multi layered, all of them. Off the back of that comment about doing things without permission, one thing I really did like in this collection is that one of the stories features an exploration of little bits of the BDSM community, and it does a really good job of showcasing how important and central to the core of what that is consent. It's very cool to see. One thing that drew me to this book, in picking this book up, was reading in the blurb that it had a story about Golem, which is one of my favorite mythological pieces. If you don't know, they're from Jewish religious lore, and I think they are just the writer's dream. They're such a simple concept that you can use to explore some really heavy stuff: slavery, heritage, free will, ownership, loads of stuff. And in fantasy, outside of Terry Pratchett, who does a really good job of actually talking about golems in an interesting way, you don't see them a lot. Raw Pork and Opium was another story in here that I found particularly interesting because I've never seen the format used before. I'm all about experimental stuff, collections with interesting ways of laying things out. This one tells two stories side by side, literally in two columns down the page, split in half down the middle, with page breaks level with each other. The two stories are two very different experiences within the same environment. You can either read one in full, flip between them, read sections of each and jump around. I think it's super interesting to be able to present a story and offer the audience multiple different ways to take it in. For me, I felt like it almost forced me to choose who to empathize with right at the start, and whoever I chose kind of eclipsed the other one. I reread the whole of Raw Pork and Opium like 3 times in very different ways, and I would recommend doing the same. I'm really pleased I picked this up because one of my 2022 BookTube resolutions was read more horror. I read a lot of things shelved as horror, and as I'm reading them, I'm like, is this horror? This is horror. This horror feels old school in its fairy tale-ness without the archaic language that can make it almost inaccessible or boring to some people. There wasn't a single story in here I disliked, and very, very little I can fault this collection on at all. I think it's a collection of horrible, beautiful, wet jewels, charming, disgusting things, gorgeously crafted and in exactly the right order, which is somewhere a lot of collections falls down. Hard 5 stars from me. I cannot believe this is a debut. I'm expecting huge things from Leon Craig, and I'll be following their career closely. Cannot wait for the next thing they put out. Go and buy this book, read it, and then come back here and tell me thank you for telling me about this book and what a wonderful time you had. So thanks for tuning in for this review. Don't forget to add me on Goodreads and Twitter. They're linked down below. I'm on Instagram now. That's down below as well. If you want to join our Interstellar Book Club for science fiction reads, join that. That's linked down below. And we'd love you to join our Stephen King readathon, which is happening this year, reading through all the Dark Tower and all the associated stuff down below as well. I'll see you soon for the next review. Bye.